Khairie, we talk about evaluating government's role in business, and here's the thing, right? I always thought that our government already has quite a big role in business, but you talk to a whole bunch of guys and they said, how are they doing? I mean, what did their assessment of it? Because for us, it's become so commonplace, right? That government,
it has,
works in business. But should that be the way?
I guess that's a question that we as a nation should ask ourselves, and we should probably have public debate, public forum to discuss this question, because ultimately, what is the role of GLCs? What is the role of the government in business, right? I mean, we know that the government does play a big role in our businesses, in our corporate sector, and so far that has manifested in terms of various GLCs controlled by GLICs. But just what sort of definition should be in place, I think that much is unclear. A lot of it is subjective at this point.
I'm also confused because for the longest time the government has been saying, Khazanah themselves say, they want to slowly divest, and they have been doing that slowly, bit by bit by bit. But it's been about, what, 7 years since the program? Have they actually divested as much?
If you go by the numbers that the government disclosed, they identified 33 companies to divest, and they did divest in various manners. So according to their numbers, they did. But on the flip side, our GLICs have also invested further in that time frame. So according to the Asian Development Bank, it became a diversification rather than divestment because of that. But then that leads to another question, you see, because ultimately, what is a GLC? How do you define a GLC?
Okay.
According to the Ministry of Finance, a GLC is a company controlled by a GLIC. And we have 7 GLICs at the federal level and quite a few more at the state level. So when we look at these GLICs like EPF, right, are they government per se, or what are they? Because, for example, EPF mobilizes our retirement savings. It's our money.
So it should be by right a fund controlled by us, not the government. Because governments, what do you call it? People don't serve governments. Governments serve people, right?
True. And technically, when EPF invests, it's our money. It's the people. They represent the people. Similarly with PNB, we spoke to Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar some time ago.
Yep.
And when we posed the question, he asserted that PNB is not government. PNB represents the people because the money is the people's savings. So that begs the question, when we look at GLICs and how they invest, what role they play, is that the government or are they not the government? But the perception is they are the government because the power of appointment is with the government. The government has a role and influence over who leads these organizations, these GLICs. And that became the question.
All right, because the thing is, if a government, I mean, all the GLCs are still run by professional managers, right?
Most.
And most of them are still run by professional managers. And if they run a company well, there should be no room for argument, correct? But your experts and the guys that we all spoke to did say that there is a downside to just having, the government influence for so long. There is so much room for abuse, as we all, read about.
That comes to the question of control. You see, who controls the GLICs, right? Who has influence over the big decisions? One concern is, what if people who have control over these GLICs try to assert that influence for decisions that are not commercially driven, like, for example, politically linked decisions, for example, and that may not be in line with what is the commercial best interest. So one proposal we have heard from these people that we spoke to is that rather than, if the government has control and influence over the appointment of who runs these GLICs, what we can do to provide some checks and balances, one way is to make sure that they report to a different body, maybe a body to oversee GLCs. Possibly
Accountability.
Exactly. Possibly select committees with the parliament. Because since they manage the people's money, it makes sense that they report to the people, which is represented by the parliament.
But it's such a tangled web, because we gave this shot of just the MOF's holdings, and they're already, and this is not even exhaustive, right? It's not even extensive.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, and that is what kind of scares a lot of people. The guys we spoke to did manage to talk a lot about transparency. That has to be key, hasn't it?
It has, because, for example, if you look at MOF Inc. alone, right, they have majority shareholding in 65 companies. The website lists 66, but one of it was divested to the Sarawak State recently, the Bakun Hydro Dam Holding Company. So these 65, I imagine, would have subsidiaries, and those are not listed. And for the common people on the street like you and me, how do we go about finding out what other subsidiaries are there, right? It's very hard to do so, almost impossible, I would argue. So that is one aspect of where the transparency is not there.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.